All right, and welcome everybody to 2017. This video is a couple days late. Would have preferred to have it out on New Year's, but here it is now. So we are going to get right into my futurecast or forecast for the year, sort of estimated predictions, going over general trend lines that are probably either going to continue, intensify, or reverse. Many having to do with natural resources, obviously, because that's usually what these rambling videos I make are about. And as I discuss these, you have here to gaze upon a small little piece of the global flight radar. It is, you can go to their website, I'll put a link in the description. It is live and current, when you go to it at least. And each individual little plane marker does represent a real-life active plane that is over that particular location at that given time. This is a small little section of the southeastern United States. You can pretty clearly make out, even though it's pretty smothered, you can make out Florida and the lower East Coast, South Carolina, North Carolina, and then along the Gulf there, Mississippi and Alabama, a little bit of Louisiana. And I click on random flights, so you can just see where some stuff's going. All right, so down to the individuals. We're going to start, of course, with oil or petroleum, as that is probably the most crucial thing always. Anyone who follows news regarding this resource, of course, knows about the recent OPEC agreements, that they are going to intentionally cut off some of their production to allow for the global price to raise up a little bit. The intended size of the cut is about 1 million barrels a day or a little bit more. Now, over the past 2 years, global production was usually around 97 million barrels a day from all sources: crude, offshore, tar sands, shale, natural gas liquids, all that stuff. Whereas demand globally was averaging around 95 million barrels a day. So again, on average, of course, it oscillates up and down. Both supply and demand do, as different things change over the course of time, short term and long term. But on average, there was a 1.5 to 2 million barrel gap between supply and demand. So with this deal, OPEC is intending to cut that gap in half on average. So that gap will most likely be narrowing. If you follow oil again, you'll already have seen that the price has gone up from averaging $45 now up to averaging $55 a barrel. I interpret it will most likely continue to rise as long as OPEC does indeed go through with that cut. My narrowest range is I'd say it's probably going to end up between 65 and that's probably on the higher end. It might stick to the lower 60s, but I personally think it's going to go a little higher. I think it's pretty much guaranteed that at least half of that production cut is definitely going to happen. The other half is kind of mixed, in my opinion. Some particular nations have a history of cheating. Some flat out kind of denied they were going to do anything. One nation in particular, though, that aside from the deal would be cutting anyways unintentionally is Venezuela. Because of political reasons, Venezuela over the past several years or so has become so wrought with corruption and so much government money that normally went into maintaining its somewhat nationalized oil industry has, along with other things, has been, sort of being funneled away into politicians' pockets and whatnot. So maintenance and new developments in their industry in particular have been slacking, and one by one fields have had to have been shut down over the past several years. Not that, again, their production was running low, but they couldn't afford to maintain it because the funds simply weren't there. So their production has been falling. Over the past year or so, it's fallen from around 2.5 million barrels a day down to just above 2 million barrels a day. I predict it's most likely going to dip below 2 million this year, probably get down to 1.8 or so, maybe 1.7. Depends just how long they let the corruption go on for. And before we come to the US, we're going to move over to China really quick, who is pretty much peaking, it looks like. Over the course of this year, I'm pretty sure it's going to it's going to become pretty blatantly clear that they've hit their peak, as they've been dropping pretty readily now, with a few tiny bumps back in the upward direction. However, I feel they're most likely going to continue a downward slope over this year. It will probably become a bit more gradual over the course of the year. It will stop being as steep. However, it's most likely going to continue in the downward direction. Maybe if they actually start bringing some of their offshore stuff online, or start dabbling with their daring ventures in the South China Sea, they might be able to get a few upward bumps, but otherwise they're definitely still on the downward direction. Regarding the US in particular, we are most likely going to resume a really gradual downward slope as we hit our second peak about a year and a half ago at around 9.6 million, and we fell on a pretty quick steep slope that's been evening out recently into kind of a flat line over the last few months, around 8.5 million or so. Although in the last few months we began falling down in a really gradual decline again, just getting to around 8.4 million once the OPEC deal was finalized. The price spikes let some fields ramp up production a little bit, which gave us a spike back upwards to around 8.6 million, as well as some other things. 2 new fields in the Gulf of Mexico that have been under development for 5 years or so were finally brought online, as well as initial developments have begun at the Wolfcamp shale oil field in western Texas. I have a video about that subject with a link to it here. It is a large shale field in western Texas in the same location as several of the others. However, it is a fair deal deeper, so it's slightly more expensive, which is why this little price jump was needed to kind of allow for production to actually start on it. And these things all in all bumped us a few weeks ago back up to 8.8 million barrels a day. However, that was as far as it was going to reach, and we've begun a gradual downslope again, currently at around 8.76, 8.75, basically 8.75 million barrels a day. Over this year, production from Wolfcamp will likely continue going up, so that may stabilize. It may uptick a little bit again, although I don't believe it's going to necessarily have a sharp, drastic increase. However, it might uptick a little gradually, somewhat towards 8.9, maybe reaching 9 million. However, most likely it's going to be somewhat flat as the development at Wolfcamp sort of matches out the gradual decline everywhere else. So by the end of the year, I suspect we will be back down on the way towards 8.5, maybe back down there already. Again, that'll depend on other things. Regarding natural gas, at least explicitly for the US, over the course of this year, I see it most likely that our natural gas production will stabilize sort of flat, maybe have a really gradual slow rise again. We've been falling for the past 2 years or so. Once shale gas had hit its peak and began its decline several years ago, that overall, as our regular natural gas production was already on a really gradual decline, that brought us back into a terminal decline of sorts, with our weekly production over the course of this past year having been about 3 billion cubic feet below what the averages were for those same weeks last year. This year, I believe it'll remain about the same, pretty much flat, may potentially upslope again, as there is going to be some small bit of gas also coming out of Wolfcamp, and developments will continue increasing in the Ohio region Utica shale, or Utica, I don't know how to pronounce it. Regarding gold, we are going to find out this year if we have indeed actually hit a serious peak for gold production. It looks like we may have. As of the past 3 quarterly reports of gold output from total mines across the world, it has consecutively fallen each 3 quarterly reports since then. Not by necessarily huge amounts. However, we may have hit a peak. My estimation would be global gold production is probably going to continue over the course of this year on a very gradual downslope. There may be, it might bump up in the middle. Potential upticks may rely on how the market reacts. If the lack of increase of mine output continues and it becomes evident that this is indeed some form of global production peak, then the price of gold obviously will begin rising, probably go from what it is now around between $1,100 and $1,150 per ounce as of me recording this, probably head upwards to $1,300, maybe $1,400 an ounce initially, as it becomes evident that production is declining. That price rise in turn may cause some production upticking. Again, we'll have to see. Also, some little known resources may start this year getting a few minor news blips about them. The first of which being antimony, a precious metal that few people actually know about, that's had several key applications that it's almost absolutely necessary for, including mag strips, infrared sensors, lasers, many things like that. Obviously, those kind of specialized industries, at least in most Western nations, try their best to get a hold of expired or broken equipment of that kind of sorts after it wears out, to get a hold of the precious materials in there to recycle and reprocess them again. However, that's not the case everywhere. And antimony is extremely rare, and it has been dwindling really fast. Much of the only remaining reserves are in China, and most of those mines initially were thought to potentially be emptied in the late 2020s. Some reserves are possibly thought to exist in northern Iraq and western Iran. However, anyone with half a brain obviously knows that those two areas are not places where doing anything is necessarily easy or safe. However, this year you might begin to see a few things blip up about antimony potentially. Also, obviously, you'll hear enough about oil, maybe hear enough about natural gas. You will, if gold production has indeed peaked, you will almost definitely see that start to pop up. Oh, and also regarding a even more crucial resource than anything else, water. As per usual, the east coast of the United States remains fine. Despite having the vast majority of the nation's population, the east coast of the United States also gets the vast majority of the rain and the storms. So there are no initial, at least major water worries on the east coast except for individual areas. The west coast, however, did receive some drought relief this year. California got a nice round of rain, and currently, even now, as I post this, is getting some more rain and some snow up in the mountains, which will obviously restore some snow runoff into rivers and lakes, as well as Lake Mead in Nevada, the main water source of Las Vegas, where basically most of the population of Nevada lives, has constantly been declining every year, as there are now too many people for that one water source to supply in a desert, because it does not receive enough precipitation to refill it. However, it has gotten about a 6-foot boost over the past few weeks, as there's been a good amount of snow and precipitation up in the Rockies, where the snow melt and whatnot comes into the rivers and helps replenish them and eventually makes it down to Lake Mead. So Lake Mead has gained about 6 feet of water level over the past few weeks and months, 6 feet of which it lost over the course, obviously, of several preceding months. So it's back to where it was a little over a year and a half ago or so for the moment. However, again, the instant those snows stop, level's just going to start dropping again. And out in the Midwest, the Ogallala Aquifer is also continuing to drop. At the end of 2015, in one particular region, the sort of bottom, to say, of the aquifer in that particular region was around 225 feet, and measuring tape was dropped down, and the water level was down to 195 feet, where it had been 194 feet the year before. So the Ogallala Aquifer is continuing to drop, despite enormous water conservation efforts on the part of American farmers and residents in the region. Water use there has been cut by, in farming at least in particular, by around 40%. However, this has only sort of slowed the rate at which the aquifer is depleting. It did, however, over the course of this year, manage to sort of be replenished by a foot, because over the course of this year, the Midwest got such an enormous amount of rain and precipitation, somewhere around, I think, 50% more than is the normal average every year for them. That did stall the aquifer's decline rate out for a little bit. However, unless unusually large amounts of precipitation become normal for the region, and unless some form of even greater water conservation measures or water reuse measures are implemented region-wide, the aquifer is going to continue to deplete, and agriculture in the region is eventually, in the coming decades, going to start growing somewhat difficult. So over the course of this year, as has been the regular pattern, I believe the aquifer will drop by just under another foot. With additional conservation measures being implemented, it may drop by maybe only 10 inches or so. Like I said, a little bit less than a foot. But unless the Midwest receives an unusually large amount of precipitation again, it is most likely going to continue to drop. So you may hear about that in news potentially, especially if you live in the region. That will likely appear on local news probably a lot. On a national scale, however, you may hear about it, you may not. It will depend on the effects on individual areas that overlay the aquifer. So that's it for this. Hope it was depressing enough, and I will see you all around next time.